Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another exciting episode of... So today we're actually going to discuss something, it's called anodizing. And what it is it's actually taking a piece of aluminum and changing the structure of it so that not only is it harder, but it can also absorb different colors and it gives you a nice little colorful finish. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick step-by-step on exactly how I do that. We're going to go through different stages of finishes, different things that you need to complete the process. And also we're going to talk a little bit about some of the safety issues with this stuff. Everyone makes it out to be a lot harder than it actually is. It's fairly simple, and you know, if you're smart and you take your time and you don't rush things, you'll actually get really good results. And if you're lucky, you'll get good results on your first out. So let's go check it out. All right, guys, welcome back out to the lab. So we're going to go over a couple of things that you need, a couple of little safety things that you also need to cover, and we'll start from there. All right, so one of the very first things that you need, and you make sure that you always have these, is you need some kind of safety glass, or splash goggles would be ideal. You're dealing with sulfuric acid. And sulfuric acid, what it does is it literally decomposes and destroys organic material on contact. You don't want to get it in your mouth. You don't want to get it in your eyes. That would be bad. Another thing you're also going to want is you're going to want a pair of gloves. You're going to want something that's long, something that is preferably acid resistant, you know, like if you use like a dish glove, something like that. What I'm using actually is I'm just using little nitro gloves, but I don't plan on holding my hands inside of sulfuric acid. Another thing, when you're doing this process, always have it on hand. Have some kind of water, and make sure that you always have some kind of baking soda. Baking soda neutralizes sulfuric acid. So if you get it splashed on you and it starts burning, you can spray yourself down or rinse yourself off with that baking soda, and it'll actually neutralize that burn. Of course, anytime that you're dealing with acids, if you get it in your mouth, if you get it in your eyes, if you get it on your skin, always make sure that you consult a medical professional. In no way am I saying that this is a save-all, end-all, be-all, okay? So if you get the acid on yourself, get some help. So another thing you're gonna need is you're gonna need at least 1 gallon of sulfuric acid or battery acid. Typically you can get this at an auto parts store. So for the anodizing tank itself, you're gonna need distilled water. You know, you don't wanna use just regular tap water. Distilled water is the process of actually boiling water up through the surface so it leaves the minerals at the base, and then that water that's demineralized comes back down into a cup or something like that, and you have 100% pure water. There's nothing in it. So it's very important that you keep these tanks as clean as possible. You don't want minerals. You definitely don't want oils. No finger oils, no anything like that. So even when you're filling up your anodizing tank, I recommend wearing gloves, because even just the minute amount of oil that you can get on any of your aluminum can cause spotting, blemishes, and just really kind of mess up the whole process. Another product is lead. You're gonna need actual lead. What this does is this actually sits inside of your sulfuric acid mix and your water mix, and you hook up your negative electrodes to it. Another thing that you're gonna want for this process also, you're gonna want a power source that actually delivers direct current. You don't want it to alternate, you don't want anything crazy. You want a constant current going to this thing. And you want to definitely be able to adjust the wattage, and you want it to be at least up to 5 watts. Another thing you're also gonna need is you're going to need a aquarium pump. And what that does is, as you have current going to the actual bucket, it's gonna create little micro bubbles. And those little micro bubbles, they can get stuck on your piece, and it causes your piece to have little bubbly films on them. And it creates a really bad part. So if we look at my little setup here, you can see that I've got a 5-gallon bucket, and what I've done is I have 3 gallons of distilled water, and then I have 1 gallon of battery acid. Now, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you pour the water in first. You don't want to pour the battery acid in first and then pour the water on top of it. It'll actually create a chemical reaction that can bubble and explode in your face. So water first, and then battery acid. So you can see here, I have my lead plates, okay, and they're just kind of hanging on the bucket. I have my little pump. I'm gonna stick him back to the side of the bucket. I have my water acid mixture, and then I have my electrode. Okay, so I have my negative wire, and it runs to the lead plate. Okay, and then I ran another wire from that to the other lead plate. So both of these lead plates are going to conduct. And then I also have the thing I'm going to hang my part with, and this is just a piece of aluminum. So what I'll do is once I get my part ready to go, I'll show you how to fix this up, drop it in the bucket, and start the anodizing process. All right, guys. So the other thing we need to talk about before you anodize any piece, you always want to take into consideration what it looks like. Your surface is going to determine how bright that color is or how dull that color is. So there's a couple different methods. One of them is you can just sandblast it and it kind of comes out with this really, really matte finish on here. This is gonna produce a matte color, okay? The other way to go is you can actually use like a Scotch-Brite pad, all right? I wouldn't recommend a wire wheel, but you can see these little wire marks that are in here, okay? This is gonna give you a little bit shinier of a finish, but it's also gonna be kind of matte. Or you can go the direction that I like to go, where I like to polish this guy up completely. You have that mirror finish and you're gonna get that mirrored color. You're gonna get that really nice metallic deep tone to it. And it's gonna shine really, really bright. It's gonna work well. So I'm gonna show you exactly how I get to this step. As far as, you know, doing the other steps, all you would need is a Scotch-Brite pad. You can find little wheels that go on Dremels, and each of these wheels, they're like little wool wheels, and they have an abrasive in them, and they come in different grits, very similar to sandpaper. And you can actually do a whole piece in this, but this is how you're gonna get these little brush marks. So there is that way. The other way is to just go ahead and do sandpaper in multiple different grits. So I'm actually gonna start off with a 400 grit sandpaper, and I'm gonna wet sand this, because if you just dry sand it, you're gonna create a lot of scarring in here, and it's gonna just be almost impossible to clean up. So I'm gonna go ahead and start wet sanding this thing, and we'll see how it comes out. Okay guys, so we've only done this for just a little bit, and you can see that it's actually already starting to make a nice big difference in all of that pitting and everything that's on there. This is actually cleaning it up quite well. We'll just keep going until we don't really see any more pitting, and then we'll switch over to a finer grade sandpaper. All right guys, so we did our 400 grit sanding, and you can see right in here in these tiny little spaces, it's real hard to get in. So what I'm actually gonna do is I'm going to go ahead and take a Dremel, and I have my little abrasive wheel, and we're gonna see if we can get most of that out, and then we'll just go ahead and re-sand all the swirl marks, because it is gonna make swirl marks on here. But we can sand that down, and then go to the next stage and use a lighter sandpaper and clean this thing up. Okay guys, we went over it with our 400, and we got most of it out, and then what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go over it with our higher grit, which is a 1500, and get all the heavier scratches out of it so that we can polish it up. Okay, so we went ahead and we did our fine core sandpaper, and what we ended up with was not really polished. It's still a little matte, you know, you can't really see through it too well. And then, you know, we're going for, of course, really high polish. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and hook it up to the buffer wheel, and we're gonna get that going. So all I'm gonna use to get that polish is I'm just gonna use some regular old turtle wax, just their standard polishing compound. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You know, we do have a couple of like really fancier options, but you know, this actually, it's cheap. You can get it in bulk, and it works really well. A nice slow speed. And don't worry about that that black color. You're gonna get that as you go through and do this kind of stuff. It's removing a lot of oxidation and things like that out of the aluminum, as well as in some cases it's doing a very small cut as well, which is what gives you that finish. You know, it's what takes out the swirl marks. Okay, so then you get to this stage. You can see how now it's really nice and shiny. Okay, now up top you can see this was before we went ahead and did the polish. Okay, and then this is after the first polish. Okay, typically when I'm doing something like this, I will do up to 2 polishes on it. With this one, because it's pretty pitted up, you know, it's got quite a bit of damage to it. I'm gonna do the 1 polish, and then that way I can actually look through with the refractive light and see how many scratches, you know, like if there's little spots that I missed. For this piece, because we're gonna use it for anodizing, most of this you're not even actually gonna be able to see. It's there's gonna be a film that's gonna build up over it, and that's gonna hide some of the minor imperfections. So always keep that in mind. If you're doing a high polish piece, you're gonna be doing this for a while. You know, this could turn into easily a couple days of a process of just sanding, inspecting, sanding, inspecting, sanding, inspecting, you know. We're not gonna do that on this particular piece. I'm just doing this, like I said, as an example. So we'll see how good it is. And then we'll go ahead and run another polish on it, and then we'll polish up the top rail here and get it ready for anodizing. Ooh, so shiny. There's still a little bit of imperfections in it, but you know, it's probably good that we go that way so that I can get you guys prepared for the things that do happen when you anodize. You always hope for something perfect, so as long as your process is good, you can get really good results. But sometimes even if you try your hardest and you get everything clean and you think you got a really good finish on there, sometimes it can still go south. It's a little finicky. Okay, so now we're at the stage where we're gonna degrease this part. There can't be any oil on it. There can't be any dirt on it. I mean, it has to be extremely clean. And so from this point on, you have to make sure that you do not touch the part with your bare hands. So you're gonna get yourself a pair of gloves, and we're gonna go ahead and get this thing degreased, and we're just gonna keep switching these gloves. Because as we're degreasing, if we do get any grease on these, and for some reason it kind of lingers on the glove, when you go to pick the part up after degreasing, you could get oil on it, and then when you put it in, you're gonna have blemishes, you're gonna have spots, runs, bleed outs, things that you don't wanna see. All right guys, so there's a couple of different degreasers that I've used. I've just used Simple Green for a long time. And then I decided to get a product that actually is it's like a foamy degreaser. And it's a spray on, and you just let it run off. It pulls all the grease, all the oils off of it, and it actually works really good. I always still rinse the part with diluted water in a spray bottle, just to make sure that, again, you know, there's no residue of this, there's no nothing, you know. So we're gonna go ahead and start the degreasing. Okay, so we have our part, we have it over the pan, and I'm just gonna go ahead and spray it down. And I'll probably do this a couple of times. I have a little bit of OCD when it comes to trying to get this perfect, and I don't wanna risk any kind of contamination to this part. And I also don't wanna risk any contamination to my acid bath. And like I said, I'm pretty meticulous about this stuff. So I'm gonna actually spray it down. And what this is this is just distilled water in a spray bottle. So there's no minerals, there's no hard spots, there's nothing that's gonna contaminate the part, okay? And then the other thing too, while you're doing this process, you know, you can inspect it and make sure that you didn't miss any areas. Because ultimately what you're gonna look for before you anodize your part is you're gonna do what's called a water break test. Okay, now what that is you're gonna actually look at the part and you're gonna spray it. And if the water just sheets off of it, then that means that you are degreased and it's good enough to go. Now, if you start seeing little bubble spots, you know, like if you're washing your car, you'll see like the water beating up and things like that. That means that there is still some contaminants on there and you'll need to go back to the degreasing step. But at this point, the water is sheeting off and we're we're looking pretty good here. So I think that this is ready to actually go into the anodizing tank. So I'll just give it a quick second spray down and we'll get it in the tank. Okay guys, so before we get the part on there, I wanted to go over a couple of different things. Number one, what are you gonna hang your part from? Well, you're not gonna use steel. You don't wanna use like baling wire or anything like that. So what I have here is I actually have titanium wire. You can use aluminum wire, but once you do one part with the aluminum wire, it itself will also anodize. So that wire is only good for one-time use, as opposed to the titanium wire under a LCD anodizing, you can keep reusing this. So I use titanium wire, and then I have a aluminum square flat that I hang my part off of. So our part will get wrapped up in the titanium wire on a good contact point so that we know that, you know, the wire is doing its best to make as much contact to the part as humanly possible to get it positively charged. And then we're gonna hang it and we're gonna submerge our part into the acid solution. Also inside of here, we also have our little fish tank pump. And what this is gonna do is these lead plates, when they're charged, they produce little micro bubbles. Those micro bubbles can sit on your part and cause bubbling on the part itself in the anodizing, and then you're gonna get like this spotty, blemished part. So that pump actually agitates this water and it keeps those little bubbles from sticking to your part. That way you get a nice even anodizing coat. Okay, so for this particular part, and the same thing I did with my upper receiver, is I have it at 11.50 volts, and I'm gonna go ahead and run it at 4.6 amps, and I'm gonna do that for about 2.5, 3 hours. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that going. And you'll see the bubbles that I was telling you about. You see those? How it's foaming up right off of those lead plates? That's the stuff that you wanna watch out for. So we're gonna go ahead and plug in our fish tank pump. Okay, so now we have our part, which is submerged in the solution. We have our charged plates. We have a good charge going to the part itself through the titanium wire hanging down. And we'll just let that pump agitate and let this thing anodize for about, like I said, 2.5, 3 hours. And in the meantime, we'll go ahead and get the dye ready to go. Okay, so this is my dye tank here, as you can see. I got my red dye in there. So what I have this set up for is, this is about 3 gallons of distilled water, and it's about 6 ounces of Caswell's red dye. So I've got my pot here. We just started the anodizing on the part, and I've got my hot plate. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this thing up on high. And then I have a thermometer. And what I wanna do is I wanna try to get this actually up to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it hits 140, I'm gonna turn this guy down. I wanna keep it at 140. That's the optimal temperature that I've found when you're using red dye. If you use any other colors, you can experiment with them. Some work better at like 120 degrees, up to 140 degrees. But red in particular is a very, very finicky color to do. So 140 seems to work really good. And the part at about 2.5 to 3 hours in the anodizing tank seems to get it a really good solid layer and seems to work very well. One thing I forgot to mention, always make sure that you do this in a well-ventilated area. I actually have some fume suppressant that I ordered from Caswell, and I put about 2 little teaspoons in there, and it seems to keep the odor down. You will smell it. That's also what these little balls in here are. These are fume suppressant balls. So you can throw a couple of those in there too. And it just reduces the fumes. You know, if you're working in a garage like me. Today it's actually really cold, so I have my doors shut. I'll probably end up cracking them and just kind of braving the weather right now. Okay guys, so once this part is finished anodizing, before it goes into the dye tank, you have to make sure that there's absolutely no acid on it at all. If you get acid in your dye tank is done. You're gonna have to empty it out, you're gonna have to clean it. The part's gonna turn out like garbage. It does not work good with the sulfuric acid in it. So since you have to go out and buy all this distilled water anyways, what I do for these small parts is I just use one of the little 2.5 gallon distilled water buckets. I cut the top off, and then I go ahead and I mix it at a 1-to-1 with baking soda and distilled water. So when that part is done, we'll go ahead and we'll drop it into the baking soda to neutralize all the acid and really submerge it in there and kind of swirl it around a little bit, make sure there's no acid on it. And then as we pull it up, we'll use that spray bottle that I had of distilled water, and we'll hose it down right over that acid neutralizer just to make sure that all the particles and everything else is also stripped off of it. And at the same time, remember, don't touch it with your hands. You got to use gloves or grab it from the wire. Just do not touch the part. From this point on, hands off, no touching parts. So those are all those bubbles I was telling you about with the agitation. See how it's keeping it off of the part? So none of those bubbles are going to stick. Then we'll check here on our dye. We'll see how that's going. Looks like we're sitting at about 120, something like that. So we're getting close. Okay guys, so we have our dye. It's all warmed up, it's ready to go. Our part is getting really close to coming off of the anodizing. So the thing is you want to have your acid neutralizing bath ready to go, because you want to get that part out of the anodizing tank and you want to get it into the dye tank as quickly as possible. Because you don't want the pores in the anodizing to actually close up on you. So you have a limited amount of time. So the part will go from the anodizing tank into the acid neutralizing bath, then we'll rinse it down, and then from there, it'll go into the dye bath. Once it goes into the dye bath, we'll let it sit there until we get the color that we want. And then from here, we'll take it and we'll actually put it in a pot of boiling water. So see, I've already got this started, and I'm gonna get this thing really nice and hot. So once you're done and you get your desired color, you're gonna put it in here, but you don't want the part to overheat. So you don't wanna just put it on the bare metal. You wanna kinda let it hang and swim and swirl around in there. Because if that part gets too hot, then you're gonna cause additional problems with anodizing.
Okay, so now we're gonna do our acid neutralizing bath. So we're gonna use, again, distilled water. This whole process is all distilled water. So we want to get it pretty good and high. We want to submerge the entire part. I want to make sure that we don't have any of it sticking up where there could be acid lingering or anything like that. So get a good water level in there. And then we're going to add our baking soda as part of our little acid neutralizer here. And distilled water is pretty cheap, guys. So don't worry about the cost of the distilled water. You know, you can pick up one of these. I don't know. I think we were picking it up for about maybe $1 a gallon. So it takes a lot, but it's not the most expensive thing in the world. Okay, so our part is finished anodizing. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it up. We're gonna put it in the acid bath. We're gonna dilute it with our distilled water. And then we're gonna go ahead and put it in the dye. And you can see, it's actually changed color. It's no longer that mirrored finish. It's got kind of a matte to it, all right? And then from here, and you'll see the chemical reaction happening as we're getting rid of the acid. Okay? So we wanna make sure that we get rid of as much as we possibly can here, okay? And then once we feel confident, we don't see any more bubbles and everything looks good, we can pull that up and rinse it down with our distilled water. And you want to, you really want to get in there and make sure you get as much as you possibly can out of there. Because like I said, if you have any acid on it, you're going to ruin your dye bath. You're going to ruin the part itself, and you're out a bunch of money. Cleanliness is key in this process. You can never be too clean. You want to make sure that there's no baking soda still left in there if you had clumps or anything like that, you know. So once we have our part completely neutralized and clean, and we are going to set that in there, okay? Now immediately when you set that in, you should start to see it take color. You can see it's starting to take color. That's not good enough. We want it a little darker. So we'll let that sit in there for a while. And you can see it's getting darker. Okay, so put that back in. Now always keep in mind that you want to keep this at about 140 degrees, okay? So when you have the lid off and it was all set to go, if you're exposed to colder areas like what I'm dealing with right now, obviously I have to turn the hot plate on because I want to keep that temperature up. I want to make sure that dye is at its optimal temperature at all times. All right, so you can see we've left it in for a little bit. And that about matches the color that we want. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this and get it sealed up. Okay, so then we go ahead and we put it in our pot of boiling water here. We wanna make sure that it gets submerged, you know, but like I said, we wanna make sure the part also doesn't get too hot. So this pot, I have it heated up to about 195 degrees, and it is distilled water. And Caswell does make a sealer. I don't know if it actually benefits in any way, but they do sell a sealer, and it recommends that you leave it in for at least 5 minutes to 15 minutes. Typically, I'll swirl it around, I'll let it sit in there for about 5 minutes or so. You can see it's getting really hot. So let the part cool down a little bit, and I'll put it back in there. So don't worry when you notice that your part is losing a little bit of sheen, okay? You're not creating like a red chrome plating or anything like that, you know? What you're doing is you're actually changing the properties of the metal. So as you're subtracting from the metal, you're also adding to it through an oxidation process. So you are gonna get a little bit of a matte finish, but the nice thing is with a terry cloth and a little bit of polish, you can actually shine it up and it looks really good. It's definitely better than what you're gonna get out of like a Cerakote spray or Duracoat spray, where you know you spray something on and you bake it and it has like this this layer, this matteness to it. You're definitely gonna get a lot more sheen out of these parts. All right, so I took it back out to our acid bath and I just sprayed it hanging over the acid bath. I sprayed it with more distilled water, and you can see that all of the dye is stuck. There's not really any blemishes either. This thing turned out really well, especially for how damaged it was. I'm actually really happy with this overall result. This thing is beautiful.
Okay guys, so I've let it sit for a little bit, shined it up, did a little bit of polish on it, and you can see this thing is absolutely beautiful. So that looks like that's gonna be our end result. I'd say that's a job well done.
What are you doing? What is this?
You're a madman. You're a madman.